Slowly getting closer, the unwelcoming terrain forced Torrent and me to attempt some daring jumps. Within minutes, we returned to that densely vegetated part of Limgrave. Inside the dark woods, I captured a scarab bearing a most curious gift. Meanwhile, fog had spread over the woodland, and feeling increasingly desperate, and even eager to reach that huge crater, I decided to seek higher ground in a nearby fort. Surely, I would be able to see it from there. Casually ignoring the inhabitants, I encountered a troublesome knight. Yet, as I attempted to engage him, he was soon joined by diseased local wildlife. Puh. Knowing how much beneath me those tiny creatures were, I left them behind and climbed a ladder. Here, I discovered the other half of that medallion, which might set the great lift of Dectus into motion. Yet before I could celebrate, the fog lifted, revealing an overwhelming sight. Enormous rocks floating in the air, exposing a massive hole into which a river now flowed. Dreading what was about to happen, I finally reached the heart of this cataclysmic impact. Spotting a viable path leading down into the hole made it possible for me to begin my lonely descent. What if this didn't lead me to that fabled place after all? Well, in that case, I would at least get to see the perfume-drenched wolf eat his own words. Wait, wasn't he supposed to meet me here? After reaching a possible way in, Torrent left me on my own upon crossing a threshold between worlds. The roar of the water above me faded as I entered a strange building, untouched for millennia. It felt surreal, likely being the first outsider in untold eons to tread these dusty halls. Noticing an archway as the only way forward, I scooped up some purple grease, which had a peculiarly soothing smell that made me feel drowsy. This is where I found myself, in an unreal city. What was this place? I had gone through an unassuming arch, and now bore witness to a sight that would haunt me for the rest of my long days. This eerie place was without a doubt Nokron, the fabled city, crucial to my mistress. I jumped onto ancient rooftops, and the entire situation was out of this world. Or rather, out of my world. The fields of inbred brutes, accessed by that magical lift in the woods, miles above me, was apparently not the only secret domain of this region. A dark, liquid substance didn't feel quite right, and while ending it, a silvery arrow pierced me from somewhere nearby. I was being fired upon, but hiding behind a fallen pillar, I wasn't able to spot the assailant. Noticing another one of those slowly moving things, I waited for the enemy to reveal himself. The creepy substance was shooting disgusting manifestations from its body, if you could even call it that. But trying to flee by going deep, that hurt. I came upon even more of those ghastly things. Reaching a somewhat safe rooftop, I entered a ruinous building, which in turn revealed a level below with strange, glowing creatures wandering aimlessly. I saw this because what had once been a marvelously masoned stone floor was now gone, disintegrated. Maybe the decay of time had only ceased to annihilate beings capable of reason, while rocks, wood, and other materials relentlessly continued their march into oblivion. Oh, how disgusting. Now I saw what they were, corpses still on duty, despite foul and bloodied bodies, with clearly visible bones. Nasty. Outside again, and entering a grand, overgrown courtyard, I realized that this dark city shared the same sky as the hidden world with the inbreds and magnificent elk. Still, it was also entirely different, and as I approached a gazebo, I discovered one of those strange objects the sickly twin maidens back in the Round Table hold were so fond of. What was that thing doing? Even creatures deep beneath the surface of Limgrave were also digging mindlessly. maybe seeking long-forgotten memories. What were those soldiers up to? Hiding behind great shields, they were throwing curious and explosive substances at me. Nay, they were just sad ghouls, obviously not a real threat. Holy mother, that hurt. Fleeing head over heels into a nearby building, I grabbed a silvery, hardened husk and one of those slightly fluorescent, meaty sacks. Seeing how the shield-loving corpses were still in pursuit, I tried to escape this area, but instead arrived at a dead end, which turned out to be a cemetery. In the middle of the awkward confusion, I gained the knowledge to summon a new ally, and wondered who it might be. Hopefully it was stronger than the others. Finally, I had found my way out of the dark courtyard, and was greeted by another breathtaking sight. The ethereal moment was rudely interrupted by a peculiarly dressed individual wielding a bizarre weapon and one of those slouching things. As I returned to marvel at the view and the grand road far below me, I couldn't help but note that thing in the distance didn't look entirely welcoming. Unsettled by that horrendous mirage, I forced myself to approach one of those shimmering walls of yellow mist. Barriers such as these were somehow always a cue for terror and torment, never pleasant meetings of kindred spirits. Entering a large temple with broken pillars and a ruined statue at the far end, I was confused by the lack of enemies. There was only another silvery puddle in the middle, and it didn't even move. Wait a moment. It grew in size, and then a warrior came out of that strange substance. I had somehow encountered myself. That creature was a spitting image of me. That thing attacked, forcing me to defend myself against myself. I felt violated. I was taller than that, wasn't I? Healing at the same time, like twin brothers, we shared a fleeting moment of peace. And what about my great mace? It was surely bigger than that in reality, right? This self-destructive fight beneath the outlandish night sky was hardly sustainable. It had to be resolved. And it was. I drowned in an all-consuming fit of righteous self-pity. Heaven knew I was miserable now. Returning to the arena, where a dashing enemy awaited me, I was struck by his devilishly good looks and somewhat worn down, yet strangely stylish armor. We mimicked each other, even performing our secret skills at the same time, something previously thought to be unique, and an expression of proud individuality. The fight that ensued, however, was anything but appealing. By the gods, that false version of me was so full of himself. He didn't possess an ounce of my humble charm. We were hitting each other with fierce determination, often missing by embarrassing lengths. It went back and forth, like lovesick youngsters unsure of what to do about that object of desire in front of them. Of course, no sense of chivalry. Having grown weary merely from looking at that lie made flesh, I used my remaining strength to punish him, harshly. Die, you vain and clearly distorted mirror image. In the wake of that disquieting fight against a deceitfully alluring creature, I for some reason felt pulled toward a nearby opening. Despite having seen it before, I trembled at the sight of the glorious temple. One day I would reach it, learn its secrets, and like a moth drawn to a flame, I ran on this bridge across the sea of stars. Trying to keep to the middle of the slowly crumpling structure, my eyes kept returning to that well-lit monument, towering in the starry night sky. This area couldn't be entirely without order. Someone had ignited large braziers, welcoming me to whatever was waiting this way. Upon discovering a broken section of the bridge, I gained access to an overgrown area below. Oh, bloody hell, those degenerate inbreds again. I thought I was done with that whole lot of brutish and feeble-minded animals. They had roamed that sickening wilderness, a place teeming with giant crabs and mysterious lights roasting anyone close by. Again, not if I had something to say about it. More of those pillars meant for ritual fires. This somehow felt awfully familiar, and not in a comforting way. Then something caught my attention. A beautiful voice reached me from somewhere ahead. While doing my best to ignore that otherworldly and strangely intriguing song, I was pierced by guilt and sadness. Trying to avoid that big-boned simpleton singer, most likely wanting to bash my head in, I made my way around, but somehow kept coming closer. How could an ugly and inbred brute, such as that repulsive thing, produce something as beautiful as this? The lands between remained a paradox, with gods who obviously delighted in making a mockery of its inhabitants. Exactly to what twisted degree, I was about to discover as I approached dark buildings adorned with strange and organic-looking sculptures. Oh, down there as well. What was the purpose of those nightmarish things? And what were they yearning for, arms spread out like that? Still closer to that gigantic and unsettling statue, I touched the site of lost grace nearby, before proceeding onward. Entering the city, I was almost scared to death by some of those ghastly sculptures. But even more curious, as I jumped down and defended myself against a half-naked individual firing at me with a crossbow, a peculiar thing happened to a nearby puddle. From the silvery substance, another strangely colored woman rose, up to no good. Ending them turned out to be surprisingly tedious. They were tough, even if those muted sirens kept distracting me with rather agreeable attire. Continuing further, I was surprised to discover just how close that horrendous statue was now. But also, I wasn't entirely sure it was a statue after all. Had that thing been alive at one point? Pushing that unpleasant thought aside, I finally approached a grand building. In truth, the only path forward. Inside, I found myself in a church-like space with a distinctly cool appearance. Everything in this area, come to think of it, almost seemed as if it were made out of ice. Would you look at that? The black wet blade I just found was engraved with a cipher. I didn't get to study the tool, though, because at the end of a long corridor, something caught my attention. Here, a chamber was walled off by a shimmering barrier, behind which someone seemed to pray. Using a key I had found earlier, I discovered that the gargoyle mechanism unlocked it, and I was granted a clear view. Entering a serene space of contemplation, I announced my presence. After giving some attention to that curiously dressed creature wearing unbecomingly long garments, I realized just how quaint this chamber was. What were they doing here? And why had they put such effort into this particular chest? Oh my. Though I didn't quite know what to expect, I felt dormant powers within this strange creature. But then again, none of the other summoned allies ever showed any backbone. Already knowing just how impotent it would be, I decided to ignore it altogether. What was that thing? Most likely a peculiar piece of art. Wondering who had the audacity to create such a bizarre sculpture, I climbed down into a large hall, where I found quite a few silvery husks scattered on the floor, as well as another of those enigmatic inhabitants of this region. What the actual fun was not being had, as I now faced not only two of these exotic creatures, but also the large, apparently hostile sculpture itself. Ha! Which turned out to be delightfully indifferent regarding its choice of victims. Fleeing from this carnival of obscure aesthetics, I gleefully realized that the vulgar sculpture was far too obese to escape its prison. Contrary to my otherwise noble nature, I even shouted, "What are you going to do about it, fatty?" Ouch! Catching my breath and acknowledging the consequence of my ill-fated attempt at mockery, I was rewarded with satisfying entertainment of the most glorious sort. With that delicious atrocity warming my heart, I was now given the opportunity to study the surroundings. I quickly discovered a nearby site of grace and found myself on that great road previously seen from above. Surely this was the way forward. And of course, at the end of it all, the enormous and frightening figure sat stoically on a throne. Not particularly feeling like venturing into the midst of that unfriendly throng of puddles, I made sure to avoid it altogether. Had that creature been a mighty king of some sort? Clearly, the inhabitants of this enigmatic city had worshipped the creature, or perhaps been oppressed. Now what? Another one of those half-naked, silvery individuals bothered me for a moment. Smiting that fellow whose attire apparently made him freeze, I located two noteworthy objects nearby. First of all, a mechanical device used for travels. Second, a luxuriously decorated chest outright reeking of immense value. Slowly pushing the heavy lid aside, I was greatly pleased to grab a blood-drenched dagger inside. Somehow knowing that the object my mistress so desperately yearned for was now in my possession, I felt pride and lusted for a reward. Touching the device, I was greeted by the otherworldly voice of beauty, the very one belonging to that big-boned monstrosity. This time, and without any sort of hesitation, I went for her. Killing that creature would be an act of kindness to this world, as it was clearly capable only of producing degenerate and disfigured offspring. Having done so, I was lured closer to a remarkable sight. A band of brutish tribe members stomping their feet in unison, accompanying yet another singer. What was it with this foul gang and their damn songs? Wild animals simply stood there, observing this barbaric ritual with an eerie calm. Maybe the brutes did contain some merit after all. What was this? I had been wrong. The simple tribe found beneath this wondrous night sky, shamelessly giving in to heretical beliefs and customs, didn't deserve generosity. I lost control of myself and dissolved mindlessly in a soothing sea of fury. The world came to a halt. I saw every single thing around me unfold long before it happened, and I released these unworthy abominations from this wasteland of barbarism. But it didn't stop there, as I was reminded of the secret of the pillars and what had been hidden. Crawling through time, I approached a glowing carcass, this one of even greater size than the one I had seen so long ago. Floating through a vast and swampy arena, full of spirit wildlife, I let myself go and tore into another majestic creature of the old world. I felt like slowly drowning in a nightmare, spanning decades. I wasn't the one doing this, I couldn't be. I was but a witness. After the longest sleep, I awoke on Torrent from a dreadful fever state. It was night, and my trusty steed had apparently brought me back to Limgrave, leaving the crater with a bitter taste. One thought lingered in the back of my tainted mind. I had embarked on the dark path of my mistress, yearning to join her and upend it all. Riding through the night, the memory began to fade, and I felt as if I returned to myself. I most certainly didn't enjoy the nightmare I had just suffered. Who would even give in to violence like that? Taking a shortcut, we ended up in front of a curious and alien stone circle. Light radiated from its center, and around it, equally enigmatic and bizarre creatures remained passive. They didn't even notice my presence. Unable to help myself, I touched the glowing mechanism in the middle and was instantaneously transported to another world. Everything looked the same, yet also different, and somehow bleaker. What was that shimmer? A hideous knight appeared, moving like a dog, just like the one in the cave with that sadly inept archer. Before I knew it, I'd squashed the warrior like a bug. Returning to my own world, I found that the dog had left me the very curved sword I had seen used by an apparition in Caelid. Surely it couldn't be of much use. Well, it hardly mattered anyhow. Seeing as the fight had been awkwardly imbalanced, I almost felt sorry for that poor thing. Imagine that, waiting down there for years, just to be annihilated by a wanderer, casually strolling by. We continued north, and before leaving Limgrave, I grabbed a radically different weapon found in a nearby enemy camp, a glorious and quite heavy sword made for thrusting. Eventually we got back to the swampy terrain of Liurnia, and as I pondered the fate of the people who had once lived here, a voice intruded.
Hello? Hello?
Why was there a little unassuming lady in the middle of this twisted lake? And what terrible ailment could have caused such an unfortunate posture?
Hello. It's rather chilly here, isn't it? My mistress sent me off on an errand, but I was accosted by a ruffian.
Oh dear.
And now I'm in a bind. Could I ask you lend a hand?
Well...
That thug made off with a precious necklace. I need someone to retrieve it. Only, he too is tarnished. If you've any qualms confronting your own, I shall find another.
Who was I to reject such an eloquently put request?
Oh, thank you dearly. What a blessing that we've met like this. The thug should be resting at an abandoned home down the way. Please, I must have the necklace back.
This world wasn't exactly seething with culture, nor with courteous behavior. It had been so long, I'd almost forgotten how to reply to civilized dialogue. And now, having pledged to help that clearly disabled servant with a tongue well versed in the art of palaver, I gallantly searched the nearby area. Not far away, there was a lonely shack, where none other than a thuggish-looking fellow was preoccupied with cooking. What was that unsightly thing covering the man's head? Had he been a prisoner?
What are you looking at? You trying to start something, mate?
My assumption didn't seem far-fetched, considering his rude words and hostile demeanor.
That necklace what you're after, is it? Well, show me what it's worth to you, and I'll consider parting ways with it. I'm not in love with it or nothing.
For some reason, I was reminded of Alexander. His laughter was never mean, nor did he hate anyone, and seeing how his strength was undeniable, there was only one obvious conclusion. It took strength to be gentle and kind.
Don't go crying to me later.
I would be kind to this smelly brute and offer him an olive branch of affection.
Oh, piss off. What is it now? Oh, I see. You want some of me prawn? Freshly cooked it is. All right then. It's yours. If you can meet me price.
Lo and behold, all of a sudden, his attitude changed altogether. I could even detect a note of softness in his voice now.
We'd make good mates, I reckon. I'll be seeing you.
Leaving the shack with this unexpected outcome lingering in the back of my mind, I returned the necklace to the well-spoken servant. I was deeply looking forward to feeling like a generous and noble protector.
Thank you kindly. I am in your debt. Did I forget to announce myself? I am Raya, in the service of Lady Tanith of the Volcano Manor. I seek stalwart Tarnished, who might join our house. You are very brave yourself.
Do go on.
Not only a steady hand, but a steady heart.
Oh yes, more.
Merciless, even to your own kind. Such strength is precisely what my mistress seeks. Please, take this.
Gratefully accepting the invitation, I felt eager to see exactly what wonders of civilization one could find at Volcano Manor.
The realm of the Erd Tree. Most Tarnished are doomed to wander the outskirts of the lands between, peering wistfully at the towering Erd Tree. But you are no ordinary Tarnished. And once that is proven, the Volcano Manor will fully extend its invitation to fight amongst a family of champions.
Her words touched something within me I hadn't felt before, a yearning for family, and traces of culture in this horrid wasteland. Continuing northward, I avoided the academy altogether. The memory of poor Thops and his tragic fate still made my blood boil with dark rage. For now, I just wanted to travel without trouble or conflict. And then, of course, a swooshing sound came from above me. What was that? A dark, eerily glowing bird appeared. Judging by its appearance, it had most likely been formed in some hellish egg, steeped in disgusting and deadly toxins. Why hadn't I already been killed several times over while desperately trying to learn its movements and way of thinking, if you could even call it that? Then it finally hit me. I also knew why I had so easily squashed that hound-like knight earlier, without even loosing my breath. Kaled, through trials and tribulations, in that horrid wasteland, I had grown, hardened. Returning now to Limgrave and Leonia, these once intimidating monstrosities were nothing but scraps. Hours later, I finally finished traveling through that cursed, swampy region. Before returning to my mistress, however, I simply had to visit the curious troll I had become acquainted with. He, like the perfume-drenched wolf unnaturally preoccupied with his own appearance, was also in the service of my mistress.
You finally come. Blythe told me everything. You've defeated General Radan, unlocking the stars. Descend underground, where the fallen star struck Limgrave, and make it yours.
I didn't want to hurt the old troll's feelings, so I just nodded and agreed.
Blythe wanted me to tell you not to bother waiting for him, and head straight to Nokron. Blythe has been given an important task.
Most likely his task was posing in front of a mirror, making growling sounds of love while eyeing himself. After purchasing several rare smithing stones, apparently used to improve exotic weaponry, I parted ways with the gentle old creature and began the last part of my journey. Feeling a desperate need for validation blossom within me, I arrived at my mistress's tower, unable to think of anything other than her warm, and maybe even appreciative gratitude. I entered her chamber. I trembled at the sight of my mistress.
It is in thy possession, is it not?
Oh yes, my lady.
Soon must I begin my journey, upon the dark path only I may tread.
Wait a moment, was she leaving me behind?
But before I leave, I shall entrust thee with this.
Why would she do that? Had I not been of the utmost importance to her?
For thy sterling efforts. A strange gift, perhaps.
This was beyond ridiculous.
But a rare source.
Oh, sure,
such
a
as
gift.
thee would welcome.
How delightful.
I must thank Torrent, too, for his part. You may leave now.
Oh, no.
It was but brief. But thou gavest me fine service.
So much for gratitude. It had all been for nothing.
What is it? You may go. I too am to depart on a journey. Upon the dark path only I may tread.
Feeling downtrodden, like a discarded toy belonging to a spoiled noble brat, I walked down to the enigmatic site of grace and sat there, contemplating this unexpected development. After hours of desperate thoughts, I decided to insist on accompanying her. Just as I was about to barge in and proclaim my intentions, I was confronted by an appalling sight. She wasn't here, Had she really left me? I froze, feeling coldness seep into my heart. It no longer throbbed with heat. Look at that. Who resided in that tower? On my way to that particular rise, wanting to search for any clues that might reunite me with my mistress, I decided to pay a visit to a most tedious enemy of mine. Oh no, he was supposed to die by my hands. It should have been filthy and prolonged. I had so much longed to repay him for every venomous word uttered while he hid under Ranni's protection. But why leave that sack of worms alone? His cold corpse, already being attended by the minuscule creatures of the earth, didn't mind. Damn you! Constantly belittling was your true profession, and look where it got you. Sadly, it didn't feel like true vindication. What a cruel joke. Never had a justified death been this unfulfilling, leaving bystanders so painfully hungry for more. If unfulfilled desires were good for the soul, then my soul had become the very epitome of vigor. Or so I thought as I went up into that strange tower. Sadly, here was no mistress of mine. Instead, I found a glowing mechanism which led me to a most curious underground area, boasting both greenery and a gently flowing river with ancient and long-forgotten stone coffins on its banks. Where was this place? And why did it feel both soothing and terrifying? Then something caught my eye. What was this? I nearly fainted. What a sick twist of fate. I had come upon a small doll resembling none other than my mistress. It was eerily lifelike and even felt cool, just as her demeanor had been. Tormented by the terrible absence and slowly losing my mind, I ended up at a nearby site of grace and began talking to the doll. I laughed with her, confessed my desire for her company, and made sure she knew just how much I yearned. And then all of a sudden, a voice rattled me.
Oh, a dogged fellow, aren't we?
Was that really her?
Or is it merely thy habit to talk to dolls?
Had I truly gone mad?
Fine. I hadn't expected any soul to recognize me in this guise. But now the cat is out the bag. I cannot allow thee thy freedoms. Perform for me a service as recompense.
For what?
Eliminate the baleful shadows which prowl these lands. The name of Ranni the Witch is already sullied by thee.
How had I sullied anything? It made absolutely no sense. Why was there this unjustified anger? Confused and hurt by those unwarranted accusations, I began a rather strange part of my journey, because it turned out that this underground river was home to those moist creatures of clay I had seen long ago, along with a rather alien monstrosity, burdened with white blisters. While wondering if I would even come upon that baleful shadow, I ventured into caves with nasty ants spurting sickening substances. I wasn't entirely pleased. At long last, fate led me to a beautiful city, seemingly shrouded in both mist and light from those uncanny stars. Yet even if it felt eerily familiar to the dreadful domain full of disfigured sculptures, this particular place was seemingly built on top of the river itself. Following its banks, I saw sights out of this world. Here, I found disgusting snails, and many of those silvery puddles generously sharing their innards. After carefully studying these foul waters, I eventually took upon me to enter the city. More of those exotically dressed individuals tried to halt my progress, but even so, I still managed to retrieve several valuable trinkets and treasures. Much to my amusement, I discovered that those silvery puddles, aside from being bothersome beyond belief, also exploded in unison when dying close to each other, almost as if yearning together for the black void beyond existence, except for one lone and nightmarish horror lurking in the shadows. One especially noteworthy thing did happen during these hours of slow exploration, namely my meeting of something which was about to become an arch-nemesis. Naturally, I saw it approaching from afar, but I didn't at that point have the slightest inkling of its devious depths. Because at the end of the day, just how much trouble could a chubby ball of iron do to a warrior of my What the? Quite a lot, it turned out. None of this made any sense. But then again, this entire city was one big riddle. Despite my best efforts, it just kept smothering me. It even went so far as to trap me inside a large chamber where I had sought refuge. Running desperately around and trying to grab the locked door did no good. Still, I took it down, and my following search revealed more of those strangely glowing plants and valuable smithing stones. But the most intimidating place by far was a large hall, its entrance carefully decorated with piles of those fiendish sculptures. While admittedly adorably sized, they also clearly warned intruders of impending demise if entering. I decided to pop in just for a moment, immediately took the nearest exit, and finally found a viable way out of this unsettling tomb of a city. The thing was, though, that the lift didn't take me up, but even further down. Oh, more hellish underground landscapes? What a surprise. How nice with a change of scenery. Enjoying the sights, with its repulsive eggs and nauseating monstrosities lurking in the cave, I eventually came to the end of my journey. Here I came upon that other servant, the perfume-drenched wolf. He materialized in a haze of blood-red fog. What was he doing here?
O Shadow, thou art the last.
Oh, it wasn't him after all, but rather the shadow sought after. That creature looked exactly like him.
With a fateful wound.
And with my mistress addressing that hateful being, I gave it my best. It just wasn't good enough. How shameful. The mere thought of having been bested by someone who looked like that vain wolf infected me with rage. And by happy chance, I discovered a delightfully vile strategy. If I used my ability to claw him with the strength of lions, and then followed up with the most forceful attack I could muster, his defenses came tumbling down. My realization had made this supposedly intimidating assassin into nothing. I did this repeatedly, and without an ounce of shame, partly because the shadow threatened my mistress, but also because of his tiresome looks. He was stunned, and couldn't do anything about it. The poor thing was locked. In vain, he tried to keep his stance intact.
Beautifully fought. My thanks.
Finally, some recognition.
It was more of a challenge than I envisioned. Now I can finally stand before them. This is farewell, my dear.
What?
Tell Blythe and Iji I love them.
And pray tell, what about me? Feeling tears flowing down my cheeks, I began running. This couldn't be happening. She was leaving us? Come to think of it, she wasn't even likable and didn't possess any beauty to speak of. Who in their right mind would even feel anything toward that blue doll? As if I cared, because I didn't, not even a tiny bit. Finally free to do as I pleased, I entered the lift, looking forward to actually leaving this land of claustrophobic sensations. Wait, what? Oh no. My eyes watered. This time, not because of poorly suppressed sorrow. The very air itself was ripe with toxic fumes, and I found myself in front of a great lake of abhorrent, rotting waters. By the gods! Not knowing what to do anymore, I sat at the banks of this hellish lake for the longest time, unable to hinder its deadly fumes from entering my worn-down body. As I listened to its waters seething with a most unnatural rot, I contemplated my fate. My mistress had now left me twice. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Maybe that family of champions waiting for me in Volcano Manor would be able to soothe the pain. But I wasn't there just yet, and needing to preoccupy myself with anything else than the torment of my current predicament, I decided to look into the vast and terrifying mystery that lay in front of me. At first, I felt like a maiden desperately trying to protect the sanctity of my body. while persistently being drawn to an abyss of depravity. Before long, however, I realized that the concept of purity was but an illusion, and I willingly entered the filthy waters without getting soiled. Lo and behold, I was accordingly rewarded with access to outlandish and hitherto hidden contraptions, enabling me to slowly make it across this lake of rot. I'd rather not talk about that part of my journey. The mere memory makes me sick to this day, and even though I found rare valuables, quite a few actually, I wouldn't want to go back to that repulsive place. Truly, those hours felt like years, but eventually I made it across to the other side, only to find myself in a long-forgotten cloister. Approaching a roaring waterfall filled with the vile substance of the lake, I discovered stairs leading downward and saw the final seconds of a lost soul who had been unable to cope with this hellish existence. Again? Now that was just sad. From the stone platform I had arrived at, I now bore witness to an uncanny sight. Below me, large insects, like the ones I had encountered near the church of the rot-infected maiden, seemed to be praying to a most likely unfathomable deity. I decided not to disturb these clearly pious creatures. It would have been selfish of me to interrupt their devout traditions, whatever this disgusting thing was. But I did not expect to find a heavy stone coffin at the far end. Now, I saw myself as if outside my own body. Like in a vivid dream, I observed how I entered that stone coffin, where I, much to my dismay, even closed the heavy lid. But it got worse. The dream became an outright nightmare as the coffin gently took off into the roaring and rot-inflected waters. For some reason, this wasn't the end, and still staring at myself in disbelief, I watched as I climbed out of that horrendous vehicle. I now found myself even further underground, in a place lit by curiously glowing plants growing on its walls. Standing in front of that shimmering yellow barrier I had come to expect, I entered despite how my flesh oozed with pain. Arriving at an enormous star-filled cave, I was disposed of by a strangely colored and large creature hovering at the far end. What had even happened? It turned out that the answer to that question was a monstrosity of appalling proportions, and for an ungodly number of hours it continued to harass and kill me. Repeatedly. And then it dawned on me. What I needed was not more training, nor a different approach. No, what was required in this situation was for me to step up my game. Since I'd come into this world, devoid of death and perpetually tormented by pain and suffering, I had never considered my appearance. But if I were to become Elden Lord someday, I couldn't reign in ragged attire. I also decided to spend those runes acquired throughout my journey, bought smithing stones by the numbers, and visited the smithing master, who gladly took care of that vulgar brick hammer still in my possession. That fiend was going to get what was coming to it, and I was going to be glorious while bashing its alien head into oblivion. Entering this vast underground arena one final time, I hardly bothered dodging the attack that always came, and on a whim decided to improve the already magnificent weapons I had equipped. Even without being familiar with the power of that warish ability, I proceeded gleefully, because I knew that the beast plagued by those many-colored and pus-filled blisters would die soon. Regrettably, my knowledge didn't hinder awkward moments, with me hitting nothing but air. But when those great hammers in unison came down on this absurd and enormous skull floating in the air, it was unlike anything else. and there was nothing in the world but the brutal climax. Obviously getting desperate, the nightmarish creature now tried to crush me with huge rocks, most likely summoned from some hellhole in another world, but to no avail. I didn't even consider its peculiar attempts at hurting me to be anything other than a waste of my time, because it was happening, and the creature was now helpless in its struggle. The demise of this unnatural fiend was approaching, and as I tore into it with full force, it broke down once more, allowing me to take pleasure in driving this obscenity closer to its end. As a final act of cowardice, it went away for the briefest moment, only to suddenly reappear deviously trying to get the better of me. But I knew the foul tricks it deployed, and gracefully gave it its death blow. If there had been witnesses to this supreme victory, they would without a doubt have loved me, and perhaps even despaired. I enjoyed that thought quite a bit, letting the unsavory sensations of satisfaction writhe in my trembling body. Eventually, I woke up from that haze of uncharacteristic cynicism and approached a quaint, glowing barrier, which apparently hadn't been opened by my knightly prowess. Realizing that I was trapped down here, and that only the roots near the flickering sight of grace could return me to the lands between, I touched them. Once again, I found myself back at the Round Table hold. Here I nobly tolerated the toothless and husky Nanny, indecently engaged with those hairy fingers, and acquired secret knowledge from her.
Now go forth.
Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, I was once again back at that grand lift. It didn't seem any different from the last time I'd seen it. Unsure of what exactly to do, I approached the stern-looking statues and nervously lifted both parts of the medallion high into the air. At first, nothing. Then the enigma in my hands began to glow, awaking the guards of stone, who in turn faced me. Ancient machinery hidden from sight and unused for eons rumbled deep within the earth. I could hardly believe the magnitude of it all. As darkness engulfed me, the contraption from a past long gone began moving my body through a hollow and vast corridor, seeming to stretch upward for an eternity. When I regained my sight, I was struck by an overwhelming sense of unfamiliarity. Feeling fresh air against my face, I gasped and took deep and rejuvenating breaths. Had I gone to another world? Nay, the capital was close, and my journey would soon come to an end. While the magnificent Erdtree loomed miles away, protected by the enormous walls of the majestic city, the throne was within reach. I could feel it. He had been right, that molester of men back in Castle Stormvale. Within me burned the flame of ambition, to set this deformed world straight.